The sky over Jerusalem had begun to darken. What should have been midday light was swallowed by an unnatural shadow, as though creation itself recoiled from what was unfolding on a hill just outside the city walls. Golgotha, the place of the skull. 3 crosses stood against the skyline, harsh, unyielding silhouettes carved into the horizon. Upon them hung 3 condemned men, but one of them was different. At the center was Jesus of Nazareth. The air was thick with tension. Soldiers moved with calculated indifference, their armor clinking softly with each step. The crowd murmured, some mocking, some weeping, others simply watching, uncertain of what they were witnessing. Roman authority was on full display. This was not merely an execution, it was a warning, a demonstration of power. And yet, something was different. The man on the center cross did not curse. He did not plead. Instead, he spoke words of forgiveness. "Father, forgive them." A soldier stood nearby, his face hardened by years of service, his hands accustomed to violence. He had seen death before, many times. Crucifixion was not new to him. It was procedure, routine, duty. But this felt different. Hours passed. The sky grew darker. The earth trembled. And then, silence. Jesus had died. But Roman law required certainty. No body could be removed until death was confirmed. So the soldiers approached. 2 criminals still lingered in agony. Their legs were broken, a brutal but effective method to hasten death. But when they came to Jesus, he was already gone. And yet, one soldier stepped forward. In his hand, a spear. What happened next would echo through history. The Gospel of John records it with solemn precision. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced Jesus' side with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. A single thrust, a moment of steel meeting flesh, and from that wound, blood and water. The soldier stepped back. He had done his duty. But history would remember this moment, not as routine, but as revelation. Who was this man? Why did he pierce the body of Jesus? And how did this single act transform from a soldier's duty into one of the most mysterious and symbolic moments in Christian history? To understand the man with the spear, we must first understand the world he lived in. The Roman Empire in the 1st century was a machine of order, discipline, and dominance. Its power stretched across continents, and its authority was enforced through a highly structured military system. Judea, where these events took place, was a volatile province, religiously intense, politically unstable, and often resistant to Roman rule. To maintain control, Rome relied heavily on its soldiers. These were not merely warriors, they were enforcers of imperial will. Highly trained, emotionally hardened, conditioned to obey without hesitation. Crucifixion was one of Rome's most brutal tools. It was not just a method of execution, it was psychological warfare. Victims were stripped, beaten, and nailed or tied to wooden crosses. Death was slow, often taking hours or even days. The purpose was clear: to humiliate, to terrorize, to send a message. And the soldiers assigned to these executions had a critical responsibility: ensure the condemned were truly dead. Failure was not an option. If a prisoner survived or if the execution was deemed incomplete, the consequences for the soldiers could be severe, even fatal. So they developed methods. Breaking the legs of the crucified accelerated death by preventing them from pushing up to breathe. And when there was doubt, a spear was used, a direct thrust to the side, designed to confirm death beyond question. This was not personal, it was procedure, it was duty. And the soldier who pierced Jesus was simply doing his job. Or was he? Among the four Gospels, only one records the piercing of Jesus' side in detail, the Gospel of John. In John 19:31 through 37, we find a precise and intentional description. The Jewish leaders, concerned about the approaching Sabbath, requested that the bodies not remain on the crosses. So the soldiers acted. They broke the legs of the two criminals. But when they came to Jesus, he was already dead. And then, almost unexpectedly, John records this moment. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced Jesus' side with a spear. The wording is deliberate. Instead, not required, not necessary, and yet it happened. John continues, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. This detail has fascinated theologians, historians, and medical scholars for centuries. Why mention blood and water? Why emphasize this moment? John himself anticipates the question, adding, "The man who saw it has given testimony, and his testimony is true." This was not symbolic storytelling. This was eyewitness testimony. The soldier remains unnamed. No background, no identity, no explanation. Just an action, a spear, a wound, blood and water, and silence. But that silence would not last forever, because over time, tradition would give this soldier a name, Longinus. To the early Christians, this moment was not random, it was fulfillment. Centuries before the crucifixion, the Hebrew scriptures spoke of a coming Messiah and of events surrounding his suffering. In Zechariah 12:10 we read, "They will look on me, the one they have pierced, and they will mourn for him." This prophecy, written long before Roman crucifixion even existed, speaks of a piercing, an intimate, violent act directed at the Messiah. And in Psalm 34:20, he protects all his bones, not one of them will be broken. Unlike the other victims, Jesus' legs were not broken. Instead, he was pierced. To early believers, this was not coincidence, it was divine orchestration. The spear, the wound, the blood and water, all of it carried meaning beyond the physical. The act of a Roman soldier, likely unaware of prophecy, unaware of theology, became part of a divine narrative written centuries before. A moment of duty transformed into a moment of revelation.
The Gospel accounts leave the soldier unnamed. No rank, no origin, no identity. Just one of the soldiers. And yet, as the early Christian world began to reflect on the crucifixion, not just as history, but as sacred memory, questions emerged. Who was this man? The silence of Scripture gave way to the voice of tradition. By the early centuries of Christianity, particularly in Greek and later Latin writings, the soldier began to be identified by a name, Longinus. The origin of this name is debated. Some scholars suggest it may derive from the Greek word lonch, meaning spear. Others believe it was simply assigned over time to give identity to an otherwise anonymous figure. What is clear, however, is that the name Longinus became deeply embedded in Christian tradition. In some accounts, he is described not merely as a soldier, but as a centurion, a commander of Roman troops. This association may have been influenced by the Gospel of Matthew, which records a centurion at the crucifixion declaring, "Truly, this was the Son of God." Matthew 27:54. Over time, these two figures, the centurion who confessed and the soldier who pierced, became intertwined in tradition. But historically, they are not explicitly identified as the same person. This distinction is important. The Bible gives us the event. Tradition gives us the identity. And between the two lies a space where faith, memory, and interpretation converge. In that space, Longinus emerges, not just as a soldier, but as a man whose life would be forever altered by a single moment. To understand the act, we must return to the mindset of a Roman soldier: discipline, obedience, efficiency. Execution duty was not optional, it was assigned, and once assigned, it had to be completed with precision. When the soldiers approached the crosses that day, they followed standard procedure. The two criminals still clung to life. Their legs were broken. But Jesus, he appeared already dead. So why pierce him? There are several possibilities. 1. Confirmation of death. The most practical explanation is simple: certainty. Roman soldiers were trained to leave no doubt. A spear thrust to the side would penetrate deeply, ensuring that death had occurred. 2. Routine procedure. It may not have been personal at all. To the soldier, this was just another execution, another body, another task completed. 3. Curiosity or suspicion. Something about Jesus was different. The darkness, the silence, the way he died. Perhaps the soldier sensed it. Perhaps he hesitated and then acted. 4. Divine purpose. From a theological perspective, the act goes beyond human reasoning. This was not merely a soldier confirming death. This was a moment written into the fabric of redemption itself. What the soldier did in duty, God used in purpose. The spear was not random. It was part of a divine narrative unfolding in real time. The hill was quiet now. The chaos had faded. The voices had dimmed. Only the wind remained. And the soldiers. One of them stepped forward. His grip tightened around the spear. The body of Jesus hung still, motionless, lifeless, yet somehow different. There was no resistance, no movement, no struggle, only silence. The soldier raised the spear. For a brief moment, time seemed to pause. Then he thrust. The metal pierced flesh, entering the side of Jesus. And immediately, blood and water flowed out. Not slowly, not subtly, but distinctly, visibly. Enough to be remembered, enough to be recorded, enough to echo through history. The soldier stepped back. Something had changed. We are not told what he felt in that moment, but the act itself was unlike any other. Because from that wound came more than physical evidence of death. It became a symbol. To early Christians, the blood represented sacrifice, the cost of redemption. The water represented cleansing, the washing away of sin. Together, they told a story, not of death alone, but of salvation. And the man who held the spear had become part of that story. What happens when a soldier realizes that the man he helped execute was no ordinary man? Tradition tells us that something shifted within Longinus. Perhaps it began with the darkness that covered the land, or the earthquake that followed. Perhaps it was the way Jesus spoke, even in suffering. "Father, forgive them." Or perhaps it was that moment when blood and water flowed from the wound. Whatever the cause, something awakened. The Gospel of Matthew records a powerful statement from a centurion at the crucifixion. Truly, this was the Son of God. Whether Longinus was that centurion or another soldier entirely, tradition often connects him to this realization. A moment of clarity, a moment of conviction, a moment when duty gave way to understanding. Imagine the weight of it, to realize that you stood at the foot of the cross, not just as a soldier, but as a witness to something divine. And that realization would change everything. The Bible does not tell us what happened to the soldier after the crucifixion, but tradition does. According to early writings and later accounts, Longinus did not remain the same man. He left the Roman military. He walked away from the system that had defined his life, and he became a believer. Some traditions say he traveled, sharing what he had witnessed, speaking of the man on the cross, testifying to what he had seen. Others tell a more personal story, that Longinus had suffered from poor eyesight, and that when the blood of Christ touched him, he was healed. Whether literal or symbolic, the meaning is profound. The man who pierced Christ was given sight, not just physically, but spiritually. From executioner to witness, from soldier to believer. Tradition continues. Longinus, now a follower of Christ, refused to remain silent. In a time when Christianity was still dangerous, still persecuted, still misunderstood, he spoke. And for that, he paid the price. According to various accounts, Longinus was eventually executed for his faith. A soldier of Rome who became a martyr for Christ. His story spread, not through official records, but through the memory of the church. He was remembered, honored, venerated. In both Eastern and Western traditions, Longinus became a symbol of transformation. A man who began as an instrument of death and became a witness to life. The spear was more than a weapon, it became a symbol. The wound in Christ's side became more than physical injury, it became a doorway, a revelation. The blood represented sacrifice, the cost of redemption. The water represented cleansing, the washing away of sin. Together, some theologians even saw in this moment the birth of the church. As Eve was formed from the side of Adam, so the church is born from the side of Christ. And the soldier, unknowingly, stood at the center of it.
It must be said clearly, the Bible does not name the soldier. It does not confirm his conversion. It does not describe his life afterward. These elements come from tradition, from early writings, from oral history, from the imagination and devotion of believers seeking to understand the moment more deeply. Scholars debate these details. Some view Longinus as purely legendary. Others see him as a real figure whose story was expanded over time. But regardless of historical certainty,
the significance of the act remains. The spear, the wound, the blood and water. These are not debated. They are recorded, and they matter. Cultural and religious influence. Over centuries, the story of Longinus expanded beyond theology into culture. The spear itself became legendary, known as the Holy Lance or the Spear of Destiny. Various relics claimed to be the actual spear surfaced throughout history, held by emperors, kings, and collectors. In art, Longinus is often depicted at the foot of the cross, spear in hand, eyes lifted upward. In literature, his story became one of transformation, a man who began as an instrument of death and became a witness to life. Closing reflection. Return now to the hill, to the cross, to the moment when a soldier raised his spear. He did not know the full weight of what he was doing. He did not understand the depth of the moment. He acted in duty, but God acted in purpose. And from that single act came a story of transformation, a reminder that no one is beyond redemption. No one is too far gone. No one is excluded from grace. Even the man who pierced Christ could be changed, could be forgiven, could be transformed. And if that is true, then it is true for you. Because the story of Longinus is not just about a soldier. It is about grace. It is about redemption. It is about the power of God to transform even the hardest heart.